So if you can turn to the Gospel of John, chapter 13. The Gospel of John, chapter 13, and we're going to start reading in verse 1. So today we're going to talk about biblical leadership or Christian, Christ-like leadership. So in John chapter 13 and verse number 1, John writes, "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. And supper being ended, the devil having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. And Jesus, I just realized I'm not doing this. And Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he was come from God, and went to God. He riseth from supper, and laid aside his garments, and took a towel, and girded himself. And after that he poureth water into a basin, and began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel wherewith he was girded." Now there's a few verses here where Peter objects. Peter, as typical, firing off, ready, fire, aim. We'll skip that part. We'll jump down to verse number 12. So looking at verse number 12. "So after Jesus, he had washed their feet, and had taken his garments, and was set down again. He said unto them, Know ye what I have done to you? Ye call me Master and Lord, and ye say, Well, for so I am. If then your Lord and Master have washed your feet, ye also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you should do as I have done to you. Verily, verily, I say to you, the servant is not greater than his Lord, neither he that is sent greater than he that sent him. If ye know these things, happy are ye, if you do them." So like I mentioned, tonight we're going to talk about biblical leadership or Christ-like leadership. And I've really been drawn to this topic. All you have to do is watch the news, and you can see lots of unbiblical leadership all around the world. And so, we want to talk about Christ-like leadership or biblical leadership. So you might be asking, well, why study leadership? I'm not a leader. Isn't that just for the pastors, the deacons, ministry leaders? I'm not a leader at church. I'm not a leader at my job. I'm just a worker. I'm just a technician. Why do we need to talk about leadership? Well, I would submit to you today that we serve as leaders in many areas of our lives, even if we don't have an official title. We serve as, unofficial leaders, even if we don't have an official title. One of the most obvious ones is parents to children. Fathers and mothers are some of life's best and most influential teachers. However, we serve as leaders in many other roles. Kara and I are leaders to our nieces and nephews. We might sometimes forget, but our generation and those that are a little bit younger than us, we're starting to come up and we're starting to be seen as leaders in the church. And I say that, we have to sometimes remember that and act accordingly. But, we frequently forget that as we are passing things on to the next generation, it's not just when we are me standing up here teaching you. It's as they're observing our lives and seeing how we live our lives. That's also teaching and training in how a Christian would do things, or maybe shouldn't do things. Now, one interesting thing is, I actually, a lot of people have seen the Emerson quote, which is something along the lines of what you're, and I should have written the other quote down. Basically, it was, what you are doing screams louder than what you're saying. The interesting thing is, I actually found that I couldn't find that Emerson actually ever did that quote. It's been simplified over the course of many, many years. So this is the quote that I actually found that Emerson said. "Don't say things. What you are stands over you the while and thunders so that I cannot hear what you say to the contrary." And that's, unfortunately, in our world, in our day, that's so common. You say one thing and do another. Leaders say one thing and do a completely different thing. They say one thing and, I was laughing at this the other day, and I'm staying out of which parties and who and what all this stuff, but one party, when they're in power, they do a certain thing. When they're out of power, then they're really upset about that thing being done. And it's like, it goes back and forth. It doesn't matter which party we're talking about, it goes back and forth the whole time. And now, at work, I happen to have an official title, but you don't need to be an official manager or official supervisor to be a leader. There's a young part-time technician at Maranatha. Kara and I used to work in the IT department at Maranatha Baptist University. And we had this technician come in, and his name was Jeremy. And he was just a part-time student employee when he came in. But Jeremy really knew technology, and he also was proactive, and he would identify things and go, hey, I think we can, I learned about this, I think we can do this. So as Jeremy worked through his college career, he became a leader in the IT department, even though he was a student employee. He was just a technician. And he eventually he got promoted, got hired on full time, became a supervisor, and became a leader. But he started out as a student employee, working as a technician, fixing computers, crawling under desks, all that fun stuff. And yet he didn't let that stop him. He became a leader. So one of the things I do want to mention is some of this information is taken from a book called Biblical Leadership by Ken Collier and Matt Williams. We actually went through this in our ABS study a couple of years ago. Very, very helpful book. If you have any questions, let me know, but great book if you're looking at leadership. So I want to talk about leadership first by talking about, well, what's unbiblical leadership? I want us to see what the unbiblical leadership looks like so that we can contrast that with biblical leadership. So my question for you, and I do like for this to be interactive, so please shout out some options here, and if you have a question, please raise your hand and stop me, except for A. No, just kidding. So question for you is, what are examples of unbiblical leadership? This could be in your day-to-day, this could be stuff you've seen on the news, but just shout out, raise your hand, whatever. What are some examples of unbiblical leadership? I have a list, but I want to hear from you. Thoughts? Yep. Political? Yep. All we have to say is political, and we can just kind of stop there. Somebody else? Selfishness. Absolutely. What are other examples of unbiblical leadership? Yes, ma'am.
Rules in the workplace, and they're not enforced.
Not enforced, so not following the rules, breaking the rules, selectively breaking the rules. We'll get to that in a second. Others. I heard something over here. Yes? Sports? What do you think in sports specifically? Coach. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying. Yep. Other? Yes?
I think just back in, during COVID, when they were forcing people to take the vaccine without their, consent.
Okay.
It's controversial, but that also.
Yeah, controversial policies. Yep. I heard something over here. Other examples? Intimidation, yes. Any others? Yes, ma'am.
Some older people, like, in a job setting that have maybe Christians and unbiblical lifestyle.
Yeah.
And they're trying to influence the younger ones to be like them.
Trying to influence younger people in a non-Christian lifestyle. Okay. All right, so, I see a number of hands. Go ahead.
Making decisions selfishly for your own benefit and not
Yes.
what's best for the team or the church.
Yeah, making decisions based on what's best for you, not the church, not the team, not the company, whatever. Did I see a hand back there? Hypocrisy. Yes, very much so. Anybody else? Oh, Keith. Lying and deception. Man, the AV guys are even getting involved. All right, so I had a number of things that just kind of came to mind as we were looking at these things, and just thinking back to some managers I've had in the past. Arrogant, blames others. This one especially. If things go poorly, they blame others. Now look a little bit later. If things go well, they take all the credit. Cheats, deceives. Keith was talking about that. They're a know-it-all. You can't teach them anything because they know it all. They're the manager. Why would they need to ever learn anything? Lacks empathy, lacks integrity, motivated by greed. I think that's one of the things, or self-serving, that's one of the things Jan was talking about, is that they're serving their own interests, not the interests of the company or the team. Steals, takes all the credit, threatens. So these are some things that I saw as unbiblical leadership. Now, what's interesting is I am taking a class, and the class is called Risk Management and Legal Compliance. Now, as I said that, I already saw 3 or 4 of you fall asleep just as I announced that class title. But it's actually a very interesting class, and to the point where Kara was even kind of interested in it, because it talks about problems that have happened in legal type scenarios, take Enron, for instance, and what happened, how we can not have that happen again. And so I've been watching some of these videos, and it's kind of like true crime genre of, they were doing this, they were doing that, there's lots of drama. So it's actually it's been very interesting, again, to the point where Kara's like, ooh, this is kind of fun, It's like the Perry Mason and Matlock are like trying to figure out who did it. And I really dated myself with those references, but that's okay. So here's some examples of unbiblical leadership in real situations. And these are some of the scenarios I've seen just in the last couple weeks as I've been taking this class. Enron filed for bankruptcy in 2001, caused 25,000 employees to lose their jobs, and billions of dollars of 401ks because they were telling everybody, invest in our 401k, invest in our stock for your 401k. And when that disappeared, their pensions were gone. Lehman Brothers, 26,000 jobs lost. One of the companies that started the Great Recession, the financial crisis in 2008, and accelerated the Great Recession. Bernie Madoff, haven't heard that name for a while, had a pyramid scheme. Now this says $50 billion. That was about how much he had manipulated. I think last I saw between 10 and 17 million is still missing. They never got it back. Just imagine that for a second. $10 billion is lost. They never recovered it. FTX, this one's recent. It's crypto. It's cryptocurrency. And they flat out took $8 billion of their investors' money and just kept it and spent it on other things. $8 billion. So here are some recurring themes. Employees lose their jobs. Investors lose their money and their pensions. Employees do as well. Vendors and contractors aren't paid. Some go out of business because this was their main contract. And the executives in charge get in their Mercedes, drive to their personal jet with tens of millions of dollars, in one case, over $100 million, and try to leave the country. So, you want to talk about some unbiblical leadership? Just look in the news. The interesting thing is it doesn't have to be just somebody, stealing millions of dollars, an executive, etc. It can be just a regular, everyday thing. I think back to a supervisor that I had right after college. We had these little things called a guard tour wand, and we had to walk around, and there were like 50 stations across 2 buildings that we had to go around and touch this thing to the little tiles, and it would basically have an electronic copy of where we went. They do this all on an app on your phone now, but this is, I'm old. So, you go around and you touch these things. Again, we had about 50 of these stations throughout the building. And the supervisor, we found out, wasn't being quite honest. I'll get to that in a second. But he would write you up. If you missed one of those 50 stations, even if you were new, he would write you up. And he would yell at you because you missed the station. Now, when I first got there, they told me that, hey, we're using the wand, but we haven't downloaded the reports out of it for like a year because nobody knew how to run the computer. I'm like, I'm a geek. I know how to do this stuff. My first night, I have it all downloaded, like everything's good. I mean, on a side note, it was literally like plug it in, put it in, press a button. Like it wasn't difficult, but apparently that was too difficult. So my boss, the boss's boss said, hey, can you print out the reports? So, okay, here you go, no problem. I actually printed mine out, I'm going through them like, oh, I missed that one, I'm going to get yelled at. But, I was kind of looking at mine. Then, we'll get to that in a second. I happened to look at my direct supervisor's report. Remember I said there were 50 stations. It went 1, 2, 3, 49.50. 1, 2, 3, 49.50. Time after time after time. And I'm going, okay, something's not right here. So then I realized there's like 50, 60 minutes between the third one and the 49th one. So I'm going, oh no, there's a problem. So I talked with my boss's boss. Come to find out, that supervisor was doing the first 3 stations, which happened to be on camera, would sit down in the kitchen, be on his phone, play games, text, make phone calls, all this stuff. He'd have an alarm would go off about 50 minutes in. He would sneak around the back, and then he would come in, and those 49 and 50, those were also on camera. So he would do those, and just did my 90-minute patrol, and man, that was hard, but I got all the stations. He had been doing this possibly for years. So as you can imagine, that guy was let go, separated. But he basically said, look, I got tired of doing this. I will let those other people do this. I'm too good for that. And so he would write you up if you missed one. He's specifically relying on his reports. He didn't have an issue with that. He didn't think he should be fired. So again, unbiblical leadership. So the basis of unbiblical leadership, and this kind of gets back to what Jan said just a few minutes ago, the basis of unbiblical leadership is what's in it for me. How can I prosper? How can I get something out of this? And that's not what Christ-like leadership looks like. So let's talk about a different kind of leadership. And we're going to do that. Actually, as I was working on this, there's a method to my madness, so we're not going to necessarily go verse by verse in order. Don't worry. Don't panic. It's okay. But the first thing I want to look at is, in order to have Christ-like leadership, we must have a submissive spirit. And this might stick out to you as a little odd as we bring that out, because you might go, well, wait a second, aren't I supposed to be being a leader? How does that work with having a submissive spirit? Well, let's look at the record of Jesus. So let's look back at John chapter 13, and I want you to focus on the manner in how Jesus served. So, verse 3 and 4 say, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he was come from God and went to God, riseth from supper, laid aside his garments, took a towel, and girded himself. Now, I'm guessing a few people in here are familiar with the whole concept of the hospitality and foot washing in first century Palestine. I see some nodding over here. So, anybody want to throw out some, what you know about that? Who usually would do this kind of thing? The servants, okay? And was this a glamorous job? On a side note, there's some pictures in here a little bit later. I always have to laugh at these pictures, especially some of the very fancy paintings of Jesus, washing the disciples' feet. I'm like, those feet don't look really dirty. If you're walking miles and miles across dirt paths, your feet are going to be a little bit dirty. This is not going to be a very pleasant experience. So, what was supposed to be done by a servant, and does anybody know, if you didn't have a servant, let's say it was a small household and they didn't have a servant, who was expected to then wash the feet? Anybody know?
The host.
The host, yes. So, there isn't a servant, then it's supposed to go to the host, and then what some people would do if they weren't able, they maybe were gone, they would leave a basin of water for their guests. And because they're in the upper room here, this could have been kind of like, maybe it wasn't a family thing, because, this is a business transaction, so I'll leave this stuff out for you. But here's the key thing. Who hadn't washed anybody's feet, including Jesus? His disciples. And for those of you that know a little bit of the backstory, anybody want to talk about what the disciples had just been arguing about not that much earlier? Anybody?
Who would be the greatest?
Who is going to be the greatest? So this is probably the last thing on their minds, because they're jockeying for position, who's going to be the best. And I've got to think this even goes to the upper room. All right, who's going to be able to sit by Jesus? Who's going to be at his right hand? Because, I want that to be me. And nobody thought, we should probably wash the master's feet. So when we talk about having a submissive spirit, Jesus, so not only was he their master, he was their Lord. He was God incarnate. And yet he's the one that took off his outer garment, knelt down, and started washing those feet. And again, this was not a pleasant thing in first century. They didn't have soap. And, it was probably very dirty. In a lot of cases, especially, it was very dry. Their feet could be cracked. I mean, this is not a very pleasant job. And yet, the Lord of the entire universe was submissive to his Father's will and was doing this for his disciples and his friends. Now, again, like I said, the disciples, being the boneheads that they are, that's a technical term, it's in the Greek. But being the boneheads that they were, they're jockeying for position, so this was kind of a shock. In fact, I think Peter finally figured out, I realize what's happening here. And then of course he goes further on and sticks his foot in his mouth, all that stuff. And we skipped over that passage, but that's what happened there. And so we have to have the same attitude that Jesus had. So first of all, Jesus was the one who submitted himself to them and washed their feet. We already talked about the disciples jockeying for position. So Jesus was the one who submitted himself to them and washed their feet. And then Jesus' life showed the importance and impact of submission. We have to have that same submission displayed. Jesus was obeying God the Father, even if that meant him dying for sins, the sins of all of us, the sins of the disciples that were sitting there with him. And he was, again, I look at the disciples and I often, especially when I was younger, I thought, how could these guys, again, that technical term, how could they be so boneheaded? I would have figured this out. If I had been with Jesus for 3 years, I would have figured it, I would have listened to it. Now that I'm an adult, I realize I'd be right there with disciples asking the stupid questions. But they were focusing on who's greatest, who has the most authority, who has the most prestige, and yet the God of the entire universe was washing their feet. So Jesus' life showed the importance and impact of submission. Now, interesting thing is, in other cases, you have, like the author of the book that I mentioned earlier, talked about Ephesians 6:1, which is, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. And the verse 2, honor thy father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise. And, this is something that Jesus did himself. We sometimes forget that Jesus was God, but he submitted himself to his human, imperfect parents. And I think there's a lot of lessons we could learn there. We don't have time for them today. But there's a lot of lessons that we could learn there. A few things that just came to my mind are specifically in Luke, when, they're going out, they're going to the temple, they come back, they're heading back home, they're missing Jesus. I don't know, where is he? Where is he? He's in the temple, and what's he doing? He's teaching. He's teaching the priests, the scribes, and they're just astonished at what he's doing. And a lot of people focus on when Jesus said, how is it that you sought me? Wist you not, or did you not know that I must be about my Father's business? And they understood not the saying which he spoke to them. We tend to focus on that part of Jesus is looking at this going, hey, I have a bigger picture. You don't understand this. I'm doing what my Father wants me to do. But the second verse after this, verse 51, I think is very fitting. And he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was subject to them. But his mother kept all these sayings in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. And that's actually the verse for Hillsdale Christian Academy, verse 52. But even after telling his parents at age 12, I must be about my Father's business, he went back home with them and submitted to them until age 30 when he launched his public ministry. Now, I remember a Christian comedian that mentioned, can you imagine being Jesus' mom or dad? He's perfect, you aren't. That gets awkward. But the worst thing is, can you imagine being Jesus' brother? Oh yeah, he's perfect. Well, yeah, he actually is perfect. That's got to be a little bit rough in the family. But, Jesus submitted himself to his imperfect parents and also to the will of the Father ultimately, and that brought out our salvation in the end. So first of all, we have to have a submissive spirit. So number 2, we need to have a sensitive spirit. Not just submissive, but a sensitive spirit. Verse 1 reads, "Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of the world unto the Father, having loved his own which were in the world." So while we're looking at having a sensitive spirit, because Jesus loved them, he was focused on the disciples' needs. He was focused on his friends. He called them his friends. He was focused on their needs. Jesus' focus was on the people in his care, his disciples. He had his radar on to determine when somebody had a need that he could meet. Now, while we don't have divine attributes and divine inspiration like Jesus did, there's a lot of parallels here with keeping our eyes and ears open for people that are hurting. And again, this goes very contrary to the world. They're going to say, hey, you do what's best for you, you do what's going to get you the most gain, and who cares about those other people? Who cares if 26,000 people lose their jobs and their retirement? You have $100 million, so that's what matters. This is completely turning the world's concept of that kind of leadership on its head. And, Jesus knew what his disciples needed at that time. Right after they were arguing about who was going to be first, he gives them an object lesson to show them what's really important. So number 2, under this, leadership requires seeing and meeting the needs of others. Seeing and meeting the needs of others. Philippians 2 says, "Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others." In Luke chapter 10, the parable of the Good Samaritan took care of the needs, and not just the immediate needs. He took him to the inn, left money, and then told the innkeeper, hey, if this is not enough, I will come back and I will bring you more. So he took care of the immediate needs as well as extended needs as that man recovered. This, I have to admit, has always been a challenge to me. I'm a technical guy. I like focusing on things. I tend to have tunnel vision. And sometimes I kind of forget about that sensitive part. And I see Kara grimacing over here. Don't amen there, please. Having that tunnel vision makes me highly effective in technical work. But it also sometimes, especially as a manager, that means you're missing very obvious signs that somebody might be going through something difficult. And now, I do have to say, I think I can say, Kara, that I'm better now than I was when we first got married, 23 years ago. But when we first got married, I would be in my own little world. I'm focusing on a problem. I would not pick up on the fact that Kara was upset about something. And then, of course, I would say something to make it even worse. And it's like, okay, now I'm in the doghouse. Let me know when I can move back into the main house. And, this is one of those things that I've struggled with, but, Kara helps, she's very much picks up on things that I do not pick up very naturally. So this is something I've definitely had to learn. But I'm guessing, and we don't have time today, but I'm guessing each one of you can think back to a leader in your life that had that sensitive spirit that made all the difference in the world. I think back to a Sunday school teacher that, he could have gone on. He was very talented, both musically, physically, with sports. He could have done many things, but he was a Christian school teacher and a Sunday school teacher. And he served for decades in the same church. And, he was my Sunday school teacher. And I think back and think of all of the stuff that he picked up on and struggles that I was having and him being able to meet those needs. So not only do we have a submissive spirit, but we need to have a sensitive spirit. Next, we need to have a sacrificial spirit. A sacrificial spirit. In verse 1, again, it says, he loved them until the end. And then skipping down to verse 15, for I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. So Jesus, his sacrificial spirit, it was not a short-term commitment. He loves them to the end. And that's not just a way of saying, well, he loved them for a long time. It's literally to the end of his life. He knew that shortly after this, he would be going to the cross for those same disciples that were jockeying for position and ignoring everything that he had been telling them for 3 years. And yet he did that for them. He did that for us, for you, and for me. It wasn't a short-term commitment. He loved them until the end of the world. Then the other, and I was just mentioning this actually, was Jesus made the ultimate sacrifice for our sins. So having this sacrificial spirit, again, goes against what the world would tell you that a leader should be doing. Hey, you do whatever you think is best. You do your own thing. Don't do that other stuff. That stuff's beneath you. And Kara's going to, smile at this, but I think back to when Kara and I were working in the IT department, and she was the help desk supervisor, so she would often have to go out on calls when somebody was having a problem. So I would step in and I would watch the help desk for her when she had to do that. And so I had I think it was a visiting faculty member come in, and they said, hey, I was here a couple hours ago. I just wanted to tell you guys, one of your technicians helped me. I think they were a visiting teacher. They were trying to get connected to the projector and having difficulty. So they came in, one of our technicians helped them. They were just thrilled. And they were telling me, just thank you for helping us with this. Your technician was great. We had quite a few student technicians that would kind of rotate through as their class schedules allowed. So I said, well, which technician was it? And they're like, oh, I didn't catch their name, but they were about this tall and gray hair, balding with glasses. I'm going, it's probably not one of our student employees. Okay. And then I realized they were talking about our director. What had happened was Kara had been out on another call, so Mike had stepped forward and he was watching The Office, and this person came in and she said, hey, I'm trying to get this thing connected. It's not working. So he went, took care of it. Everything was good. They just assumed he was the technician. He was the manager. He was multiple levels above any of the student employees, but nobody else was there, so he was going to help them, and he stepped in and did that. He didn't say, no. I've done my time. I've done this for 35 years. I am not going to do that. You just have to wait until a technician gets here. He didn't say that. He said, not a problem. I'll help you. Not even to the point of, I'll help you even though I'm the director. No, he just said, no problem. Let me help you. And that was it. And that was a sacrificial spirit that he had. And he was very good because, for those of you that are managers know, well, we shouldn't always be doing that because, we were hired to do the managerial stuff. So he would always do that when the help desk was fully staffed. But if somebody was sick or whatever, he'd step in and it wouldn't be a problem. It was normal for him. And again, it was just really funny when they said, yeah, about this tall and baldy. I'm like, wait a second, that's not any of our student employees. And sure enough, it was our director. So looking back at this, we must have a sacrificial spirit. Having this idea of, well, that's beneath me, I have employees for that. No, Jesus stepped forward. Now, should his disciples have been washing his feet? Absolutely. If there was not a servant and the host wasn't doing it, Jesus' disciples should have stepped forward. And honestly, it's a pretty big no-no in that society, in that culture, that they didn't. The fact that they did not was generally perceived to be insulting to the master. So the fact that Jesus sacrificed in this way, and again, ultimately paid the ultimate sacrifice for us, he was showing true biblical leadership. If you look at Hebrews 3 and verse 16, but do good and communicate, forget not. And to communicate, forget not. For with such sacrifices, God is well pleased. And that communicate, I've seen people translate that word as giving or even benevolence. Like, don't be greedy, share and meet those needs, and with such sacrifices, God is well pleased. So we've talked about three things tonight. We've talked about having a submissive spirit. We've talked about having a sacrificial spirit. And we've talked about having a sensitive spirit. I almost forgot my third point there. One of the amazing things is, after we do these three things, again, which go counter to the world, Jesus says something very important as we ended that. If you look at verses 16 and 17 in John chapter 13, Jesus says, "Verily, verily, I say to you, the servant is not greater than his Lord, neither he that is sent greater than he that sent him. If ye know these things, happy are ye if you do them." So by doing the first three, we will have a satisfied spirit. A satisfied spirit. So happiness is a byproduct of this forgotten form of leadership. Going back to what the world would think, by default, most people would think you'd be miserable if you were submissive to others, sensitive, and sacrificial. It's all about me. Why would I submit to or sacrifice for something else? But look at what Paul says in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 11. "Now I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need." So as we wrap up tonight, lead with submission, sensitivity, and sacrifice, and you will have a satisfied spirit. So again, a different leadership: submissive, sensitive, sacrificial, and satisfied. This is very interesting. I actually found this quote just as I incorporated this pretty late into the PowerPoint. I found this quote by Oskianis. "Character and leadership has been replaced by image. Truth by power and plausibility. Confession and moral changes by spin control and image makeovers." We'll talk about our world today. Look right there. On a side note, he made that quote 1999. A little bit of foreshadowing there. Or maybe nothing's new that's in the world. We're doing the same things that we've generally done years and years ago. So as we wrap up today, looking at application, wash dirty feet. It's not glamorous. It's not fun. There's probably somebody there that should be doing that isn't you. It's because it's their job. That doesn't negate the fact that it needs to be done. So Jesus didn't just do things a servant did, but he was a servant. And that quote kind of really stuck with me, because you could have somebody that, for the cameras, comes in, they serve food to the needy, they're there for 15 minutes, they leave, that's it. Looks good for the camera, they're not actually serving, they're not a servant. Jesus didn't just do the things a servant did, he was a servant. So we're not just occasionally doing things, good things. It should be who we are. And the priority is to serve the priority is to not serve in order to be noticed or praised. We should serve even though no one knows except the Lord. I do have to often think of this scenario of, the IT guys, the AV guys up in the booth. We talked about this on Sunday. You don't notice anything unless it goes wrong. If everything goes right, you don't even notice the guys back there. So they're serving in the background, and the only time that you notice them is when something goes wrong and everybody does this to turn around and look at Keith and go, "What's wrong, Keith?" But that's not why we're serving. We're not serving for the attention. We are serving in order to be a servant like Jesus was. So again, a different leadership.